Welcome to Spotlight on Schools. We focus on the Rochester City Schools. I'm your host, Jim Strauss. This is our second program with Banke Awopetu-McCullough, author of the novel Always Want More. If you want to see the first episode or any episode in Spotlight on Schools, you can visit our website at spotlightonschoolsblog.wordpress.com or on our YouTube channel, Spotlight on Schools. Banke Awopetu-McCullough taught English in the Rochester City School District for 11 years. She is currently an adjunct professor at MCC. She also does consulting work and classes through her website, concreterosepublications.com. Welcome back to Spotlight on Schools.
Thank you.
This paragraph appears on a fact sheet from your website. Always Want More chronicles Tracy Mitchell's journey as a first-year teacher in an inner-city school district and the deliciously dangerous balancing act she walks between her professional and personal life. When the two worlds collide, she is left with a decision. Will her desire to reach children classified as hopeless be enough to keep her from a forbidden life with her soulmate? Where does the title Always Want More come from?
It actually comes pretty early in the novel where Tracy and that soulmate that the fact sheet references, his name is X, are having a conversation. And he tells her, you can't get too comfortable, you have to always want more. And that really stood out to me because it really speaks to the tension of the novel. So on one hand, Tracy is ambitious, she's inspiring, she's always talking to her students about, wanting more, going for better. But on the other hand, that same ambition is it's a little ungrateful, it leads to greed, it leads to some of the decisions that she makes that seem to be in contradiction to her core beliefs.
Okay. Well, we've been reading passages from the book which deal with the challenges of teaching in the Rochester City School District, something both you and your main character, Tracy, did. So let's pick up where we left off last week. A word of warning, there's some pretty raw language coming up. We talked about this last week, but please tell us why you chose to include the raw language and the frank sexual scenes in this book.
I believe that art should be authentic. And so when we're telling stories of characters, you want to have the language that reflects who those characters truly are. I personally enjoy profanity. I think it shows a particular type of transparency and vulnerability, and I wanted to include that in the novel as well. The language, the sexual content, even the criminal references, they're not gratuitous. They're not to promote any of these images, but it is to reflect what's really happening. So like hip hop, Always Want More is a very raw story.
Okay. Well, let's go to the book. We're on page 67. At this point, this is a dinner that Tracy is prepared for X, and in which she reflects on her job and her community. On page 67.
I never got around to asking you what you do. A few months ago, she would have been too proud to say she was a writer. These days, the only thing she was writing were lesson plans. I'm a teacher. Word? What subject? English. I could see you doing that. You like it? She paused before answering. I do. It's just not what I thought it was going to be. She hadn't said that out loud before, had tried to stop herself from even thinking it. How so? He dipped a piece of asparagus into the lemon butter sauce before pushing the whole piece into his mouth. She watched his lips. Well, I was living in the city as a writer. Everything was perfect and then everything wasn't. I had no idea what I was going to do. Had to make money, so I started substituting. I loved it. So I emailed one of my former teachers, great lady. She did 30 years in this district. She tissed. Shit, I'll be lucky to do 3. But anyway, I emailed her and she told me about this graduate program that would put me right in a classroom. So I came home. You look around and you see that Black people have it worse than ever. We have the lowest life expectancy and the highest rates of unemployment and incarceration. No march, no speech is going to save us from that. We've been there and we've done that. And now the system is so entrenched that we wouldn't even know what to protest in the first place. These kids listen to pure rubbish all day. And when you talk to them, you realize they really don't give a fuck. Really. They have nothing to live for. So education is the only way to make a difference, but it has to be specific. It has to be thoughtful. It has to be deliberate. Because once the people have nothing to lose, they fight back. They rise up. If we could just tap into that, if these kids could just apply. She trailed off and took a sip of her lemonade. It really could change their lives. He just looked at her for a moment. His eyes were warm as if he were seeing her for the first time. Heat rushed to her face and she lowered her eyes. Finally, he spoke. You really believe that? I don't know. I can't stand some of them. Like they come to class, don't do shit, don't even try to. Most of the other ones are sweet, dumb as hell. You ask them why, and the first thing they say is, I don't know. They don't even think about the question. Then there's some that's smart, but act dumb. Like, when did it become shameful to be intelligent? I guess you can chalk that up to the Trinidad James of the world. She sighed. It felt good to be able to say these things. She would feel like a race traitor if she said this in front of her cohort. She already had to suppress the urge to get offended every time they said something negative about the kids. Ultimately, truth was truth. Still, one sideward glance from Tracy and her colleagues would adjust their tone or stop talking altogether. The fear of the angry black woman came in handy sometimes. She smiled. But even in the midst of complete hopelessness, there are some that have that spark, that are really trying to make it out. Those are the ones that I really love. He nodded. And those are the only ones who have a chance. Problem with the schools is they're trying to save everybody. God doesn't even work like that. You make a chance to walk with him or you make a chance to walk away. What choice have you made? Baby girl, you shouldn't have me in your house if you have to ask that question. What type of niggas you deal with? Heat ran to her face. Hard to tell who's who these days. No, it isn't. It's actually easier now. You judge a man by what he does, what he stands up for. If it's nothing, then he's nothing. Every good tree bears fruit. The schools need to chop the rest of them down. Yes, but with the right push, fuck that. They're holding everybody back. It's not their fault. The system created them, but whatever. For our purposes, he waved his hand between him and her. For our purposes, they gotta go. There never was a successful slave revolt in the States. You know why? There was always an informant. She was quiet. Just like slave owners strategically employed tactics to reduce their fine African specimen to cowering chattel that either in glee or pure fear of the godliness of their masters revealed plots that could have changed the course of history, the education system had lobotomized a once vibrant people into welfare recipients and call center employees and prisoners. X wiped his mouth. You can cook. I've never had stuff like that at somebody's house. She waved a hand. That was nothing.
In my first email to you when I asked you if you'd be interested in coming on this show, I told you that I'd read this book and that parts of it challenged me. This part challenged me. The education system has lobotomized a once vibrant people into welfare recipients and call center employees and prisoners. Is that Tracy? Is that you?
Both. I think that when we're talking about trauma and poverty, and especially in the context of Rochester, a lot of people would justify the state of our schools because of those issues. But if you look at education post-integration, right? So we're talking about segregation, we're talking about black schoolhouses, we're talking about very underfunded, mass classes of different ages, all kind of lumped together, lack of supplies, lack of books. I see that the culture was stronger then. That's my understanding. Obviously, I wasn't around then. Well, hopefully it's obvious. But, and then we look at what we have now, and we see that the Rochester City School District is one of the highest funded districts in the area, right? So what's the disconnect? Again, I think it goes to lack of black educators. I think that when we're talking about, and for one, let me backtrack and say that teaching is an absolutely noble profession. I believe it's a calling. I commend anybody who does this job. I don't think that anybody on the outside can really speak to it. We see teachers being criticized a lot, and I'm not one of those people. But at the same time, as an educator, if you are teaching in an area that's populated by a culture that you're not familiar with, you need to do the work. And that work is not being done. There's a lot of implicit bias. There's a lot of direct racism. There's a lot of disconnect, and we see that in the results that's coming out of these systems. And again, if you were to compare, again, these numbers that she kind of mentions when she says, incarceration rates or life expectancy. And so, 50 years after integration, right, after better facilities, after supposedly racially diverse schools, when we see that the results are still the same, what's the common denominator there?
Schools?
I believe so.
Yeah. I would add that, though, where are the jobs, where's the housing? Those are
Right.
also factors. This is a big topic.
Absolutely.
However, we're out of this time for this segment, so come back. I want to continue talking about this segment.
Okay.
Don't go away. Welcome back. We're talking about the novel Always Want More, and we just read a section where Tracy is talking about her experiences in education with her new boyfriend, Oxford. One line that stood out to me, these kids, she says, listen to pure rubbish all day. And when you talk to them, you realize they don't really give up. Now, pure rubbish. Are we talking about the music they're listening to, which we talked about earlier, or are we talking about what they hear in a classroom day after day?
We're talking about both. So again, when we're talking about commercialized music and the difference between rap and hip hop, one can argue that rap is causing very, very negative impacts with students, but also what's going on in the classroom. So, you know, in this novel, Tracy mentions some of the things that she hears white teachers saying to the students, but that's just in passing, that's in the hallway, and that's when she's present. So we can only deduce what happens when those classroom doors are closed. And again, when you are teaching, and if you're not using culturally competent curriculum, even if what you're trying to share with your students could be, you know, wonderful, but if it's not in the lens of cultural competency, then it's like womp, and then we can argue that's rubbish as well.
I was reminding about something we read earlier where we're talking about where she promised them she wouldn't give them mindless worksheets and fill in the blanks and stupid stuff like that. All right, she goes on to say, so education is the only way to make a difference, but it has to be specific, it has to be thoughtful, it has to be deliberate. We talked in the break, and you said this is you talking, not just her. What do you mean by specific, thoughtful, and deliberate?
Again, when we, and I think people are very well-intentioned when they say things like, I don't see color, or, you know, I love my students as if they were my own. But if you were to look at your own child, right, would you want them to have this particular curriculum? Are they really being pushed? Are they really being challenged? And again, when we're talking about socioeconomic disparities, the education has to, one, acknowledge those disparities and be very specific, intentional, and deliberate as far as how to combat those disparities.
Later on, X asks her, do you really believe that? And he says what he thinks. He says, schools need to chop off the rest of those who aren't trying. For our purposes, and he goes like this, and I wondered, what's he talking about here? We know his purposes. We find those out later on. We got to get rid of those kids who aren't trying, who aren't going to do anything. One of the thoughts that came to me was, do you, the author, mean that? Is he talking about what many schools have adopted, which is a zero tolerance? You mess up, you're out. What are your thoughts?
I honestly am on the fence with that. I think that X, in his own way, he kind of represents the black conservatives. As far as, you know, well, show and prove. And if you're not proving something right now, then you don't deserve the right to be there. But even now, as we see, you know, the reform efforts and more emphasis on cultural competent curriculum, a lot of people keep referencing Africa. We say the village and this and that. One, that's kind of counterproductive. And when we're talking about Africa, we try to, you know, to sum it up as one country, right? But at the same time, the sentiment is, for the most part, positive in that we're trying to connect to kind of ancestral norms. And being Nigerian, right, and actually having been in Nigeria, education is a privilege. It's not something that you're allowed to fritter away. And so when we say we want to go back to the village concept, are we really willing to take on all that entails?
Which is patriarchal in a lot of places, matriarchal other places. Certainly.
Students being flogged, right? Like you don't look in the teacher's eye when they're talking to you. And so, again, with this novel, it's not my intention to offer answers, but to pose questions and let the readers come to their own conclusions.
Well, I read these things to look for answers. However, let's go to a faculty meeting. We're on page 110 now.
Fiction doesn't give answers.
Doesn't mean I don't look for them.
I hear you.
Okay. Top of page 110, she goes to a faculty meeting and she hears from Mr. Waring.
Thank you, Mr. Kennedy. The head of their testing department, Mr. Waring, took the mic. If you want to keep the state out of our school, we need higher scores. You have to incorporate the academic selection strategies that you learned last month. Mrs. Wilkins whispered to her, "He means ass, just like him." Tracy rotated her head in order to try to stop the anger rising in her. Why not let the state take over? These fools damn sure didn't know what they were doing. Why didn't they take a few years to fix the systematic issues in the school instead of fritting away their resources on pretending that everything was okay? They damn near cheated in order to raise test scores. Grade inflation was rampant in order to increase the amount of students who graduated. Behavior standards were lax in order to reduce the suspension rate. In turn, the students were receiving an education that was probably worse than what they would have gotten in the Jim Crow South. Her hand was up before she could stop herself. Mrs. Wilkins elbowed her. It wasn't wise for probationary teachers to bring attention to themselves. Mr. Waring nodded in her direction. She plowed forward. 4 lessons is a lot to dedicate to test prep. Wouldn't it be more advantageous if we use that time on actual content? Content is not enough. Students need to learn how to select their answers. It takes 4 lessons to learn how to fill in a bubble? Mr. Waring's face reddened. Last year's score seemed to suggest so. It would be more advantageous to base our actions on that rather than on the suggestions of a first-year teacher. We need to try to dispel test anxiety, encourage the students to actually try in the exam. If you are where you're supposed to be on the curriculum pacing charts, that leaves you with plenty of time for the test prep. Pacing chart? She had tossed that in the garbage the second after she removed it from her mailbox. She talked to her students. She hadn't heard the word learn in one of these meetings yet. All they ever talked about were tests. Then there were tests to see how the students would do on the tests. Then more talk and more tests. These kids deserved more than that. They needed more.
Okay. Did you get a sense of satisfaction in writing this section? Getting
Absolutely.
Stuff off your chest?
Yes.
Pick something. Pick something. How about why didn't it take a few years to fix the systematic issues in the school? Systematic issues we've been talking about.
Mm-hmm.
Instead of the grade inflation, behavior standards. You saw these things?
Yes.
Tracy sees these things. The test preparation, from where I stood in my years in education, test preparation is more than filling in a bubble. We know that.
Yeah.
But I understand that the concentration on tests is just, it's death for education.
Right, and especially with in urban areas. So again, it's more than filling in a bubble, but it's just kind of this idea that your students are not doing well on the test because you're not doing enough test prep, as opposed to changing your pedagogy. And when that happens, when students actually have hands-on experiences, they're allowed to have field trips, true learning experiences, that's when you see test scores raise. And I spent the bulk of my career at School Without Walls, and we didn't waste our time on test prep. And I was at the middle school, so we actually had the same state exams as everybody else, and we had the highest scores. So I think that test prep is rubbish.
Okay, well, we're about out of time for this segment. So when we come back, we're going to look at some of the activities that, we'll finish with this book, but also look at some of the activities you're involved in after you left the school district. So don't go away. Welcome back. We're talking with Banke Awopetu-McCullough. We're finishing up the book, Always Want More. The last section we'll look at is on page 111, where Tracy's going to be observed by Mrs. Wilkinson.
The other women left after they had gorged themselves with the needed amount of gossip and complaining. Tracy stayed behind to run through her lesson again. She was being observed in a couple of days. The process was simple enough. Tomorrow she would meet Miss Hancock, the head of the English department, who would ask a couple of questions and make a suggestion, some minute tweak that Tracy would fawn over. On Thursday, Miss Hancock would come watch her teach. She was supposed to evaluate Tracy and her content knowledge, teaching strategies, and interactions with students. But what she would be the most floored by was Tracy's classroom management. She would marvel at how cooperative the students were, how they interacted with each other. Who knew that these students could behave? And it wouldn't matter that they wrote papers with citations and participated in collegial circles and actually discussed literature. None of that would draw much attention. Miss Wilkins, Miss Hernandez, and Miss Campbell had received the same type of evaluation. Minority teachers were never recognized for their mastery of the content or their ability to teach, just as minority administrators were always assigned student management instead of curriculum or operations. They were overseers in the modern-day plantation.
Let's pause here for a second.
Yep.
This paragraph suggests that the minority teachers were better at classroom management. That's not the point of this paragraph, though, is it?
No. The point is that the actual pedagogy, the actual content, that is rarely celebrated. So when you see black teachers, and if you were to look at evaluations and compare them by race, you would see all these marks about rapport and management. It really downplays the true teaching ability. Classroom management, what does that even mean, really? But you have students who are more cooperative, better behaved when the teaching is strong. So it's not a matter of, intimidating your students or dominating them into submission, but rather truly engaging them. And the same thing with administrators. You see black administrators are always given student management as opposed to curriculum, as opposed to operations, as opposed to things that really speak to their true professionalism.
Mm-hmm. They were overseers in the modern day plantation. That's powerful.
Yeah.
Okay, well, let's go on.
Tracy just wanted to receive a proficient rating. That score wasn't hard to come by. She overheard two teachers in the copier room saying that they gave their students candy bars for complying during the observations. Fortunately, Tracy didn't have to sink to that level. She had told her kids, "Somebody's going to come in here tomorrow. She's here to watch me, not you. Make sure I don't beat y'all." Mm-hmm. The kids laughed as she swallowed a kid, and the class went on. If she were in charge, the observations would be random, a bit more frequent. That way, there wouldn't be any room to hide behind trick lessons. Of course, the union wouldn't stand for this. They were in the business of protecting teachers, not in the business of ensuring that students actually learned. Consequently, a teacher could be mediocre and get tenure. Once you got tenure, you had to either fight or fuck a kid to get fired. It didn't matter what she thought, what she said. Mr. Waring had made that clear in front of the entire staff. Heat rose to her face again. They were all a bunch of cowards, even the tenured teachers. They spoke boldly amongst each other, but became yes men in front of those who could actually change policy. She was going to get tenure, and she was going to light this place on fire.
This is her attitude. She was relatively young.
Mm-hmm.
Is this how you felt?
First-year teacher.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
You take on the unions here, and you say most teachers are a bunch of cowards. Do you mean that?
Well, this book, disclaimer, it was written years ago because it took me a long time to get it published. And so where I was in my career at that time, this reflects it. I have a deeper understanding now. I do believe that unions are in the business of protecting teachers. When we look at the city school district, we see that the unions are the only stable factor in what has been a lot of instability, right? So I get it. Are most teachers cowards? I think that most people go along with the status quo, and teachers aren't any different. I think that, again, when you see teachers in the copier room or, in the lounge, they say a lot of things, but do they say those things publicly? And I think that if you were to poll most of the teachers in the Rochester City School District, they want certain reforms that the union may be against. But again, how do they elevate their voices? Are you going to be that teacher to speak up against the union that's protecting you in this very volatile and unstable situation? And myself, I don't have children. I don't have a mortgage. It's easy to kind of say what you feel. But when you have to feed your family, is that cowardice? I don't know. But I personally have to say what I believe.
Mm-hmm. I'd love to have this conversation. We would take another half hour at least to talk about this. Unions don't have a voice in who gets hired, and they don't have a voice in the observation, yet they are there to protect the teachers. They're in a tough place. That's
Yeah,
my
they
opinion.
are. I hear you.
Okay. Well, we're done looking at this. There's a lot more that happens in this book, folks. But I want to go on and talk about you. You left, like Tracy, well, I won't give it away, but you left the schools.
Yes.
You went to Monroe Community College. Can you talk about your role there?
Yeah, so, and I'm very honest with this. I burnt out as a teacher with the city school district. And like Tracy, you start off strong, you have all this passion, and you sometimes you find yourselves in conflicts that maybe if you were to temper that passion, you wouldn't be in. I'm very honest and forthcoming about saying that, because I believe that when you get to the point where you no longer believe in what you're doing, it's your moral obligation to leave. We need the best teachers in those classrooms. We need the most energized. We need the most optimistic. And so if you are that teacher, even if you have a mortgage and you have children, please know that there's life after the classroom. You don't have to stay there. You don't have to be miserable. You deserve more, and so do the students.
But you're working with a very important group of students. We
Yes.
can talk about that.
Right, so at Monroe Community College, I teach developmental reading and writing. And so it's the same population as far as racial makeup that I had at the city school district. I became a teacher to teach black students. I'm also very forthright about that. So I really enjoy Damon campus of MCC. But developmental reading and writing, that's a remedial course. We see that all across the country, a lot of students coming out of districts like the city school district, they end up in remedial courses where you're paying, but you're not receiving any credit. And most students who enter that route won't graduate.
1 in 20 people come out of the city school district prepared for college work. Staggering.
Yeah.
Well, we're getting very close to being out of time.
Yes.
So, if people want to find out what you do, the website's important. Concrete Rose.
Publications.com.
Okay, you do some work out of there. If you go to that website, you will find out more about Banke and the work she does. But where else should they go if they want to find out more about you?
Right, so if you have any business inquiries, you want to go to Concrete Rose Publications. We do print, we do stage, we do film, we do character development curriculum, we do professional development. We work with the people, we work wisely, and we work out of love. If you want to know more about me as an author, then you want to go to banketheauthor.com, and you can follow me on all social media at Banke the Author. Concrete Rose Publications, we have a blog called Black Teacher Chronicles, where, like this novel, we really break down the specific existence that black teachers have.
Okay, and where can they get the book?
You can get this masterpiece on banketheauthor.com. You can also get it on concreterosepublications.com. And this is sold everywhere books are sold. And it's available in the library. So if you're like me and you don't like to spend money on books, and this is me talking as a person, not a businesswoman, you can go to the library and just check it out.
Okay. Well, I want to thank you so much for being here
Thank
these last
you.
two episodes.
It's a pleasure.
I had fun. Well, we've been talking with Banke Awopetu-McCullough, educator, consultant, and author of Always Want More. You can view this and other episodes of Spotlight on Schools on our website at spotlightonschoolsblog.wordpress.com or on our YouTube channel at Spotlight on Schools. Thank you for watching. Good night.